In July 1944, a young German named Gert Schramm was sent to the Buchenwald concentration camp. At the entrance, there was an inscription that read, "To each his due." However, none of the prisoners in that place had done anything to deserve hunger, beatings, torture, and death. In Gert's case, his only sin was having a skin color that the Nazis deemed impure. He was black, and Hitler's followers were not willing to forgive him for it. Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you everything about the life of Gert Schramm, the young Afro-German who lived through a hellish experience. To understand this story, we have to go back to the year 1923. 5 years after the end of World War I, France sent 100,000 soldiers to the Ruhr Basin in western Germany. This area was strategically important as it was one of the country's major centers for coal, iron, and steel production. With the occupation of the territory, the French aimed to collect the money owed to them by the Weimar Republic, which had not yet been paid. This maneuver sparked outrage among the Germans, who had not only been defeated in the last war but now had to witness a blatant violation of their national sovereignty. Furthermore, they felt insulted by the fact that a significant portion of the occupying army came from the French colonies in Tunisia, Morocco, Indochina, and Senegal. There were approximately 20,000 black soldiers who now roamed freely in Germany. Driven by racism and the belief that people of African descent were inferior, the Germans launched a propaganda campaign accusing the troops of color of heinous crimes. It was claimed that they were mass-raping white women and children and posed a threat to the future of European civilization. Let's hear what historian Julia Roos, one of the leading experts on this topic, has to say about it.
During the war, they were already publishing propaganda warning that the French colonial troops would cut off the ears of German soldiers and wear them on strings around their necks, that they were barbaric and acted like animals, and were being ordered to do so by their French superiors.
In reality, what was happening in the Ruhr Basin had nothing to do with the lies of racist propaganda. Although there were inevitable conflicts and tensions, the occupation never reached those levels of brutality and savagery. Meanwhile, the German government legally prohibited German women from getting involved with the French soldiers from the colonies. However, these relationships still formed, and as a result, between 600 and 800 mixed-race children were born, classified as mulattoes. These young people were the target of the conservative press, which gave them the cruel nickname "Bastards of the Ruhr." What happened during the French military occupation was crucial in fostering racism in the Weimar Republic and paved the way for the Nazis' brutal policy towards blacks. The protagonist of our story, Gert Schramm, was born on November 28, 1928, in the city of Erfurt, Germany. At that time, the National Socialist movement was slowly but surely growing, the memory of the French colonial troops was still fresh, and anyone who was black was viewed with suspicion. The boy was the son of Marianne Schramm, a white German woman, and Jack Brankson, a black American engineer. Gert's father worked for a San Francisco metallurgical company that had been contracted to build a bridge in Thuringia. For this reason, Brankson was dispatched to the German nation to oversee the progress of the project. The couple met in Marianne's father's tailor shop, and after a brief courtship, their first and only child was born. Neither of them imagined that, in just a few years, the boy would have to go through hell. Gert's father left Germany once his contract was completed but continued to visit his son sporadically.
Naja, in der Familie ist das genauso gut abgelaufen wie in jeder anderen Familie auch, in der Familie selbst.
It seemed they would lead a normal family life, but things changed in January 1933 when Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Once in power, the Nazi Party focused on realizing its dream of a racially pure nation, where the supposed Aryan race would dominate the rest of the population. As is well known, their primary target of hatred was the Jews, but the truth is that blacks were also among those they despised. In April 1933, the Nazis managed to pass the law for the restoration of the professional civil service, which stipulated that, from that point on, only Aryans were qualified to hold government positions. This was just the beginning of a new era of hatred in Germany. Seeing that discrimination was promoted by the state itself, many ordinary citizens felt that their racist actions were fully justified and endorsed by the authorities. In this way, Afro-Germans, numbering around 30,000, noticed a sudden change in their living conditions. Finding stable employment became a challenging task as no one wanted a black co-worker. They were excluded from social welfare services, and evictions became commonplace. Hundreds of black families were kicked out of their homes by landlords, leading to an increase in indigence and poverty within this social group. In fact, some remember that during those days, they couldn't even walk the streets in peace. The possibility of being victims of a racist attack or being publicly humiliated was extremely high. Interracial marriages were also prohibited. In Nazi Germany, it was necessary to submit a formal application to the state to authorize a marriage. In cases where the couple consisted of individuals of different skin colors, the application was rejected. At the same time, the government was alerted to the existence of an illicit union, and action was taken accordingly. The couple was often harassed by the police and, at times, arrested and subjected to interrogation. In some cases, they were even subjected to forced sterilization under the pretext of maintaining the racial purity of the nation. It was clear that there was no place for blacks in the Third Reich. Gert Schramm learned this lesson the hard way when, in 1941, his father was arrested while visiting Germany on one of his regular trips. Let's hear our protagonist recount this event in his own words.
Arbeitsbedingt nach den Staaten zurückgegangen, ist dann wieder zurückgekommen und ist 1942, als dann der Krieg, also 1941, als der Krieg anfing, ist er dann verhaftet worden und ist dann ins KZ gekommen, ist in Auschwitz nur offizielle Meldung keine, aber so über Mund zu Mund ist er in Auschwitz ums Leben gekommen.
Although this was a devastating blow to the boy, who was 13 at the time, the worst was yet to come. In May 1944, it was Gert's turn to be detained by the authorities and brought before the Gestapo for the sole reason of being black and a descendant of an American. By that time, the United States was already at war with Germany, so anyone with American blood was viewed with suspicion. For 2 months, Gert was transferred from one prison to another, beaten and deprived of food. In July 1944, he was sent to Buchenwald, one of the largest concentration camps within the German borders, where he was assigned prisoner number 207-4497. His sentence was extremely vague, as he had been sentenced to stay there for an unspecified number of years, but it should not be less than 15. Once inside, our protagonist mingled with a varied group of inmates, including Roma, Jews, political opponents of Nazism, common criminals, Jehovah's Witnesses, prisoners of war, and homosexuals. The young man was forced to work in a stone quarry, mining resources for the German industry and carrying rocks for hours. As if that weren't enough, one day he heard the sound of engines approaching his position. When he looked up, he could see a group of Allied planes flying over the camp. However, they were not there to rescue them, but to bomb them, and Gert was in their path. The explosions caused massive destruction and left our protagonist buried under the rubble. Fortunately, he was rescued by other inmates of Buchenwald, who debated what to do next. This is how Gert recalled it: "I suffered a severe head wound during the bombing. Still, at first, my fellow inmates were not sure if taking me to the infirmary was the best option because they feared I might die. Prisoners in poor condition were labeled as parasites and left to succumb to starvation. However, my wound became infected, and I developed a fever, so there was no choice but to take me to the clinic. Doctors took me to the operating room, where a man was having his leg amputated without anesthesia. When it was my turn to be treated, they opened the wound with a scalpel without any delicacy, and I was on the verge of fainting from the pain. With the help of pliers, they removed a metal splinter that had lodged in my skull. That was not enough, and they had to resort to a hammer and chisel to remove it completely. With each blow, I felt like I was being beheaded. Gert survived that torment, and then, for 3 weeks, he was cared for by the inmates of Barracks 42, which was reserved for political prisoners. Most of them were communists who had been detained for years, so they knew all the secrets of Buchenwald. They taught him what to do if he wanted to survive that hell, such as never looking SS guards in the eyes, standing in the middle of the line when prisoners were reviewed, and never drawing attention to himself. To prevent him from returning to the strenuous work in the stone quarry, his companions made the necessary arrangements for him to be transferred to the carpentry shop, where the tasks were much lighter. Thanks to the help of the communists in Barracks 42, Gert survived until 1945. By then, there were rumors among the inmates that Germany was about to surrender, and the enemies of fascism would not be long in coming. Some prisoners built a homemade shortwave transmitter and used it to send a Morse code message that read as follows: "To the Allies. To General Patton's army. We are in the Buchenwald concentration camp. SOS. We need help. The SS want to exterminate us." A few minutes later, they received an encrypted response: "Hold on. We are coming to rescue you. 3rd Army of the United States." True to their promise, the Americans from the 6th Armored Division arrived on April 11, 1945. By then, there were only 21,000 weak and emaciated inmates, among them Gert Schramm. Finally, after a year of beatings, hunger, diseases, and brushes with death, the nightmare had come to an end. In June, he had recovered enough to return home and rebuild his life. For a while, he worked as a translator for the Soviet occupying forces in East Germany. Later, he worked as a miner in France, but eventually, he founded a taxi company in the Netherlands. For the rest of his life, he traveled the world, sharing his story and warning about the dangers of fascism and racism. In 2011, he published his autobiography, Who's Afraid of the Black Man, to leave a permanent record of his experience in Buchenwald as a legacy for future generations. Gert passed away in 2016 at the age of 88 and is remembered today as a man committed to the fight against discrimination and totalitarianism. We've reached the end of the video. Leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.